Hello and welcome to Breaking Down, the series where we take an in-depth look at a Fire Emblem unit from a gameplay perspective. Before we start, I would like to thank the people who have backed the channel on Patreon, where for just £1 a month, you can vote on the next unit to be released in this series. More on this at the end. Today we will be looking at the heir to Count Gloucester, Lorenz. Whilst this series is not focused around plot, there is always a chance for spoilers, and certain elements of the game and its structure and story will inevitably be mentioned, so if that is a concern for you, feel free to give it a miss. Also, where relevant, this is considering the maddening difficulty on a regular new game file with no exploits or excessive grinding. Lorenzs starts in the Golden Deer house, so if you choose them as your home, you can make use of him from Chapter 1. If you opt for one of the others, he will need to be recruited. Like with most students, you can do this by getting a B support with him on Byleth, upon which he can ask to join your class on any day following this. Alternatively, Lorentz's recruit requirements lie in Charm and Reason. Whilst raising Charm on Byleth isn't too difficult, the base for recruiting Lorenzs starts rather high at 20, and raising Reason on Byleth is usually not an ideal source of investment either. Because of this, the B support is usually preferable. One other thing to note with Lorentz's availability is that he does also leave if you are playing the Azure Moon or Silver Snow routes. This will occur just after the time skip, and he will be re-recruitable on Chapter 16 when he is defeated in the battle on the Bridge of Muradin. It's often rumoured that he needs to be defeated with Byleth, but this isn't the case. As long as you defeat him in battle, he will rejoin you from the next chapter. Just make sure to bear this in mind, especially if Lorenzs is an important member of your team, as you will lose him for a few chapters here. Even if you don't intend to use him, recruiting Lorenzs can be ideal in a lot of situations, as he is the only way to unlock the Paralog battle, Land of the Golden Deer. Clearing this grants the relic staff Thyasus, a very powerful tool which increases the range of magical units by 2. This is very desirable in most situations, so will be something you want to access. The Paralog first becomes available in Chapter 7, so if this is all you plan to recruit Lorenzs for, doing it during this chapter will leave him at the highest level for his force deployment. Lorentz's personal ability is Distinguished House, which gives him an additional 2 damage when he is equipped with a battalion. For the vast majority of the game, pretty much from Chapter 3 onwards at least, there is no reason for Lorenzs to not be equipped with a battalion, so this is basically just 2 extra damage. Cool. It's nothing revolutionary, but 2 extra damage in both the physical and magical areas is a good thing that you're never going to be upset about, and it's pretty much always active, so this is basically all good all the time. Lorentz's crest is a minor crest of Gloucester, which has a 10% chance to boost his damage by 5 when using magic attacks. It's a very slim chance to activate, but when it does, it gives a touch of extra damage for basically no drawback. Again, it's hard to find any reason to complain about this. This also lets Lorenzs make use of relic weapons and equipment without taking damage, and when using the relic associated with his crest, Thyasus, grants him Pervice and Aegis, as well as additional healing when using the Axe of Ukon Vasara. These are all minor benefits, but can help Lorenzs out on occasion. Lorenzs has a very small skill spread, with 3 boons in Lances, Reason, and Riding, and a single bane in Brawling. There really isn't much going on here. The single bane in Brawling can have some small impacts if you wanted to make use of Gauntlets early, since it will slow down his access to prowess skills, and make some potential class paths such as Grappler look a lot less desirable, but these aren't really premier options for Lorenzs anyway, so most of the time this isn't really doing anything of note and can largely be ignored. Lances are Lorentz's primary weapon type, and being able to make use of the powerful Tempest Lance combat art from the outset is a great advantage to have, as this gives him a massive boost of 8 might as well as 10 hit, which can help him out considerably, particularly early on. This can make him much more of a threat than he would be otherwise, and accessing prowess skills with less investment is always appreciated. This can also make it easier to access several classes, which can benefit Lorenzs too. Lorenzs also gets his most powerful tool from this skill, with that being Frozen Lance. This is a magical combat art, meaning it hits on an enemy's resistance and is fueled by the user's magic stat rather than their strength. Frozen Lance also provides 3 additional might, as well as 30% of the user's dexterity as might too, which will usually contribute for a few extra points of damage even in the early game. Being able to hit on an enemy's resistance while still making use of the might of weapons is incredibly valuable, and can make Lorenzs a tangible threat to many enemies. There are also a lot of high might lances Lorenzs can use in conjunction with this, and a lot of them are available very early. You get some situationally high damage options, such as the Horse Slayer, which has 24 might against cavalry, and the Blessed Lance, which has 21 might against monsters, or 27 when forged, both as early as Chapter 8. You can also make use of relic weapons, such as the 22 might Lance of Ruin, available from the start of Chapter 6 if Sylvain is in your party, or the 17 Might Lewin, available from Chapter 7 if using Ingrid. Of course, all of these lances can be used with Frozen Lance to take advantage of the benefits it provides too, including hitting on resistance. Having such a powerful magic tool gives Lorenz a lot of viability as a mage, so the boon in Reason holds a lot of value. Unfortunately, he does not have a boon in Faith, so if you did want to make use of this half of his spell list, it will require a little more investment to be able to access. As for his spell list itself, the Reason side is a bit of a mixed bag. Fire is a nice option early, being quite accurate and light, and Agnia's Arrow hits reasonably hard in the late game, although not even close to as hard as Frozen Lance. However, all of his spells can be used from range. Over in Faith, Heal and Nosferatu are standard for everybody. Recover, which he gets at the C rank, is just a bigger heal, which can hold occasional use but isn't really anything special, and Ward provides a boost of 7 resistance to an adjacent ally, which diminishes by 1 for each turn it is active. This is very rarely useful for its actual effect, and is most commonly used just to give some EXP to the caster. Although coming at a B rank without a boon, I don't really think this is worth it, and outside of grabbing the lower ranked options, his Faith can largely be ignored. The Reason boon can also help with prowess skills, as well as reaching the requirements for some classes a lot easier, which is always nice. Similarly, the boon in Riding also helps with a lot of class qualifications, and having the base rank for this skill be the same as the base for Cavalier means that no investment is needed to open up that option for Lorenz. It can also be helpful for acquiring the Dex plus 4 skill, which is nothing special, but thanks to Frozen Lance it can provide a little bit of damage, which is nice. All in all though, these boons are mostly just used for certification purposes rather than anything particularly unique. That, honestly, is all there really is to say about Lorentz's skills. He gets a few useful things here or there, with Frozen Lance being a very clear standout, and some pretty solid base ranks, but mostly they are actually quite low impact. The one other thing to mention is that outside of brawling, the lack of boons means he doesn't really have any trouble raising anything if he needs it for any reason, such as class certifications or making use of weapons that come from those skills. Moving on to Lorentz's stats, and they are really odd to judge. Take his strength for example. For a physical unit, 8 strength is tied for the lowest, however for a magical unit, 8 strength is pretty solid. On the other hand, 7 magic for a physical unit is really decent, but on a magical unit it's appalling. In case you haven't realised, that means he has bad magic for a magical unit and bad strength for a physical unit, and even with the damage boost provided by Distinguished House, they still aren't anything great. He also isn't squishy, but he isn't really bulky either. His defense stats are just a little bit average, particularly the 6 defense and resistance, with 28 HP being serviceable. His 7 speed is also okay, but a little rough since at base, he is only offsetting 1 weapon weight, and needs to gain a couple of points of strength for that to change. One area that is particularly abysmal is his base charm of 3. This makes it really rough for him to hit or avoid gambits, and with a shambolic growth, this isn't likely to change either. Overall, Lorentz's stats are just bad. They are something he has to fight against to be able to succeed and hold him back quite a bit. Lorentz does also have a might support with fellow noble Ferdinand von Ayer. This means that the two units will give each other a little damage boost based on their support rank with each other when they perform linked attacks. Unfortunately, their support caps out at a B, so cannot give the highest bonus possible, however it's still better than not getting anything at all, and can allow the two units to help each other out. If you have both available to you and don't plan on using one of them, making them the other's adjutant can be a solid way to benefit from this. Before we move on, one other thing that has to be mentioned is Lorentz's gender. This can hold him back quite noticeably, as a lot of the stronger magical classes, such as Valkyrie, Gremory, and Dark Flyer, are all gender-locked to be female only, meaning he is completely unable to access them. This is very unfortunate, as he would really appreciate these, and something he will have to navigate to be able to function effectively as a part of your team. There are still some options available to him, but missing out on these and the tools they provide is a blow. When using Lorenz in the early game, despite having pretty mediocre base stats, he can actually contribute quite well. He comes with Tempest Lance, which allows him to output some quite sizable damage with lances in the early game thanks to its spike of 8 might alongside 10 hit. Alongside this, his personal ability grants him an additional 2 damage when equipped with a battalion, which can be utilised as early as Chapter 2. The only downside of giving him an early battalion is his very low charm will cause him to be unreliable with the actual gambits, so you may wish to wait until chapter 3 to give him one of these when they are less limited. Because of his balanced stats, Lorenzs has the option to go for a physical or a magical build, and then within that, if you choose to prioritise magic, he has the choice to go for a build which leans into his spell usage, or to pass that up in order to make better use of his combat art. Whilst the latter choice can wait until later, you do need to figure out whether you prefer physical or magical combat fairly early, as it can influence the early pathing Lorenzs goes down. I will say now that whilst he has the option to go physical, I think he is much better suited to a magical path, as the physical tools he gets are basically non-existent outside of a serviceable strength stat. It's often seen as a drawback when a unit is more balanced in terms of strength and magic rather than specialising in one area. However, it does hold a sizable benefit in the early game of making the push to level 5 much less pressing, and also much easier. The noble and commoner classes have to contend with only having half the spellcast that they would usually have, so Lorenzs being able to exploit his lances as a primary method of combat here can be very appreciated, so that he can reach level 5 with much less urgency. Lorenzs has a few options for where he can focus his efforts early. He can nudge his reason rank up to a D, in order to access the fire spell as well as guarantee a promotion into monk at level 5 without having to gamble this. There can also be merit to raising his bows to the D rank in order to access curved shot, a bow combat art which grants 1 might, 30 hit, and is available from 2 to 3 range, providing additional flexibility in the situations he can attack from. These are both pretty attainable and can make a notable impact on Lorenzs, and the investment in both areas can be useful later too. Grabbing Heal from Faith can also hold merit, allowing for a little extra healing, utility, as well as some extra EXP opportunities for Lorenzs. Authority is another strong early investment for Lorenzs, particularly if you want to make use of him as a magic-based unit, since the earliest magic battalions require D authority to be able to make use of. Due to Lorenzs' abysmal charm, he can also be an ideal candidate for utility gambits, such as Stride or Resonant White Magic in the early game, since with these he doesn't have to worry about his accuracy and reliability being held back in this area, although typically these tend to provide lesser statistical benefits, but there are some that can be very useful for him. The first big goal that Lorenzs will want to push for is C+ Lancers, in order to access the combat art that is held at this rank, Frozen Lance. This is a huge power spike for Lorenzs and massively amps up his kill potential by allowing him to make use of the might of weapons while still hitting on an enemy's resistance. Getting this as soon as possible is extremely desirable, and something you will want to start pushing for almost immediately. With the boon in this area and the D starting rank, it should be attainable by chapter 4 at least, even with some small investments into other areas. At some point on the path to this, Lorenzs will hit level 5 and be able to certify for a beginner class. Assuming you are aiming for a magical build, the ideal choice here would be Monk. This grants access to Lorenzs' spell list, and whilst this isn't great, access to it is better than not having access to it. Mastering the class also grants the ability Magic +2, which can help his damage output, as well as the combat art Draw Back, allowing him to reposition himself and an adjacent ally by moving both back by 1 tile. Once Lorenzs has Frozen Lance, picking up any of the other tools missed earlier, such as Curved Shot or some further reason spells, as well as maintaining his authority growth is a solid plan, and he can contribute to combat both through his high damage hits from the Lance combat art, or by chipping away at enemies with his spells. Another area of investment worth consideration is Riding, which can be raised to C rank to gain access to the ability Dex +4, which basically provides 4 hit, 2 crit, and when using Frozen Lance, 1 to 2 points of damage. When he hits level 10, Lorenzs has a few class options. One thing that can be briefly considered is certifying into Thief, which will usually give Lorenzs a single point of both speed and dexterity on average. Thief requires C swords to guarantee the certification, and whilst alone these stat boosts probably aren't worth the investment, access to the Levin sword also opens up at the same rank. This is a magic weapon that, when forged, has 1 to 3 range. This gives Lorenzs a more flexible magical attacking option, as well as a magic ranged attack he can use if in a class which does not allow for him to use spells. As for classes which are actually useful for Lorenzs to be in at this point, Archer is a strong choice. Since Lorenzs is unable to access Valkyrie, he cannot access the Uncanny Blow ability it gives when it's mastered, which is a strong accuracy boosting option. Because of this, his only available accuracy skill is Hit +20, which is gained from mastering Archer. Archer requires C bows to guarantee the qualification, however you can gamble it at D+. Whilst in the class itself, you can make use of Frozen Lance to have Lorenzs still contribute, and his physical attacks with bows or lances should still be fine here too. Mage is an obvious choice for Lorenzs at this point, but it is a strong option. This requires C Reason for a guaranteed certification, or again it can be gambled at D+. Whilst in the class, Lorenzs is free to use his spells, and also gets an extra point of magic. When the class is mastered, Lorenzs gets access to the ability Fiendish Blow, which boosts his magic by 6 when he initiates combat. This is a very strong tool that provides a sizable damage spike. The only issue with this class is its low 4 move, which makes it a struggle to utilise Frozen Lance effectively. Cavalier is another class that is very strong at this point in time. Unlike Mage, you don't get anything desirable from mastering it, however it is very strong to actually be in, thanks to providing 7 move and Canto, allowing for very good mobility to make excellent use of Frozen Lance to wipe out any enemy that you need to. Whilst in the class, Lorenzs is unable to make use of his spell list, but can still contribute with weapons either utilising physical attacks or things like the aforementioned Levin Sword. This requires D Riding and C Lances, the former he has from base, and the latter he gets from getting Frozen Lance, so certifying for this doesn't really cost any additional investment. From here, Lorenzs will likely be approaching level 20, which is where he really starts to feel the impact of being male. Not having access to classes like Valkyrie or Dark Flyer is painful, but he does still have a very strong option in the form of Paladin. Whilst this does not give Lorenzs access to his spells, it does provide him with Lance Fair, giving him an additional 5 damage to his lance-based attacks, including those performed with Frozen Lance, helping him pump out more damage and pick up more kills. It also comes with 8 move and Canto for stellar mobility, and the freedom to take out basically whoever he chooses. Paladin requires B Lances and B Riding to guarantee the certification. The Lance rank will very likely have already hit by now just through use and passive growth, so is not out of the way at all, plus further investment helps by granting more prowess skills, and the riding shouldn't be too difficult to raise with the boon. You can also gamble this whilst missing 2 ranks, so you could be at B Lances and C Riding if you prefer, with the latter being the same rank that riding unlocks Dex +4. All in all, this is very easy to reach. Honestly, this is a perfectly valid endgame class for Lorenzs, and possibly his strongest option. You can quite happily leave him in this, and he will be a very threatening player phase unit who can take out most enemies he hits. Attacking on their resistance will give him the edge against most foes, and effective damage from weapons such as Horseslayers or the Blessed Lance can take out specific types of opponents. Lorenzs does actually have an edge here that a lot of mages do not, as whilst many can struggle with Pegasus or Falcon Knights due to their higher resistance, Lorenzs' strength growth means he can handily switch over to a bow to pick them off if needed. Of course, regular lance attacks can still be used against other high-res enemies, such as mages. The skills you will want to run here will look something like Lance Prowess, Fiendish Blow, Hit +20, and Magic +2, with a flexible last option. Sword or Bow Prowess, Dex +4, or Swordbreaker can all be strong options depending on the map and the situation. This lets him be a very reliable player phase threat, and none of this requires too much work or investment to reach. As for a battalion, something like the Alliance Sages can be ideal if in his own house, providing a huge magic boost of 8 whilst also having a utility Gambit which helps play around his low charm. Another level 20 option is Warlock. This requires a reason to guarantee the certification, and unlike Paladin, does allow for Lorenzs to make use of his spell list. It also provides Black Tome Fair and a +3 magic modifier, meaning that the damage with Frozen Lance will only be 2 points less. The big drawback here is that Warlock only has 4 move, something which can be absolutely crippling to the class. It also does not provide Canto, making it even less mobile. Warlock also has 17 base magic, so if Lorenzs is below this, it can be worth a quick qualification to patch this up. Ultimately, I think the lack of mobility is just too much of a hindrance, but you can make use of this if you wanted to. If you wanted to invest further into Lorenzs, then you don't have to stop at an advanced level. At level 30, he can look at going Dark Knight. This requires C Lances, B+ Reason, and A Riding, which is easily obtainable considering how late this class will become available, and that these are Lorenzs' 3 boon areas. Plus, with it being a master class, you can be missing a lot of the requirements and still gamble the qualification. The requirements here are attainable to a point where you can probably just pick this class up naturally, at least on a gamble. I don't think this class is strictly better than Paladin, there are ups and downs to it. The most obvious upside is that Dark Knight allows for use of Lorenzs' spell list, and although this isn't anything incredible, it can be nice to have. It also provides a magic modifier, increasing this stat by 2 whilst in the class. However, despite this, it does less damage with Frozen Lance than Paladin, as it does not bring Lance Fair, although the non-lance based attacks, such as using a Levin Sword, will be better here. Paladin also provides 1 more strength for physical attacks against high-res enemies. The biggest drawback of Dark Knight compared to Paladin is that it only has 7 move, rather than the 8 provided by the Advanced class, which is a knock to mobility, although it does have better ranged options, particularly if you make use of Thyasus, which could outweigh that deficit should you opt for Dark Knight. I do think Paladin is usually the better class, mainly because it makes better use of Lorentz's more important and most powerful tool, Frozen Lance. However, I think it can be beneficial to unlock access to Dark Knight so that you can flex into it when it may be optimal. Due to having so few Banes, Lorentz is actually pretty flexible to pick up anything else he may want to. For example, if you wanted to certify into the intermediate class Brigand, which requires C access to guarantee the qualification, you could pick up the Deathblow ability, which provides 6 strength when the user initiates combat, increasing the damage of his physical attacks, which can be useful for taking out high resistance enemies more reliably. You could also look at temporarily classing into something like Armor Knight to gain the base 12 defense the class provides. Lorenzs being a hybrid between physical and magical offense is typically a drawback, but there are some small advantages to be gleaned from it if you did want to lean into it, and I think it makes for quite a well-rounded killbot, as whilst he doesn't hit quite as hard as his peers, he can be more flexible with what he can take out in terms of enemy variety, and he doesn't really have to worry about anything in particular. Of course, you are free to go for different builds entirely, such as focusing on his physical lances, or even just going into something like Sniper, but I think primarily making use of Frozen Lance will lead to the best results. That wraps up Lorenzs. I hope this helped you to get the most out of him. I would once again like to thank the people who have backed the channel on Patreon. It really helps me out a lot, and the support is greatly appreciated. When this video goes live, the poll for the next unit in the series to be released will still be running, which is open to every remaining unit who has not yet been covered. So if you want to have your say, you can do so for £1, which lets you vote on all of these for a month. It also provides other benefits such as inside info on upcoming videos, a role in the Discord server, and of course, your name being in these credits. If you want to discuss this video, the channel, or Fire Emblem in general, consider joining the Discord. Thank you very much for watching.